awkward sexual implications is the perfect segue to talking about the next episode. It's the Unquiet Dead, and as I mentioned, this episode opens with Rose and Nine wanting to bang hard.
How many times did I tell you? We're like, no, I don't think the doctor really, not until 10. Incorrect.
Had I seen episode 3 when I was meant to see episode 3, there would be no questions.
You can't ever see that and then unsee it.
They're not subtle about it.
Nope.
And it makes all of their interactions where they're not supposed to be romantically coded super awkward.
Okay. Are you talking about the bit where she appears in the dress and he says, "You're beautiful"?
I'm talking about right before that, where she's like, oh, you go off and you see all of these places, and like the way that...
Oh, yeah. He says, "You're beautiful," though, he also says, "considering you're human." That was probably just him burying his feelings or whatever, but...
I feel like this scene's really awkward. Like, Russell T. Davies is not sure how to write the Doctor completely just yet. Like, he's trying to make him so alien that he can't even relate to humans, even though they look exactly like Gallifreyans.
Well, that was Gatiss, but yeah.
Or whoever's writing this episode, I forget.
Well, I mean, that's a consistent trait with 9. These early episodes especially, but like series 1 as a whole, you can argue they're just finding their feet. They're just working out how they want to characterize this guy. But for 9, I buy that coming from him as like, he's super detached. He wants to view himself as above humans, and he's constantly dehumanizing them.
This one might just genuinely feel a little more alien than the typical humanoid body he steps into.
He might genuinely just find humans unattractive.
It's in the Alien 2-parter where they're all kind of sitting around watching the news, and he looks so damn uncomfortable to be sitting there. Chris Eccleston plays it great. I am an alien. I do not relate to any of this whatsoever. Please get me out of here.
I can't be here watching daytime TV shows with you.
My favorite bit actually from that is when he actually leaves that party and he's like, I can't remember the exact line, but he says, "Oh, it's too human in there for me. The world's just changed," and they're talking about was it finances or something? I can't remember what they were talking about, but it was like something normal. He was just like, those people are weird.
Finance is so weird.
I don't have a lot to say about this episode. It is a Mark Gatiss episode.
I think the premise of it, of the fact that the ghosts are just aliens trying to travel through the stream, that's an interesting idea. I think it does try to be a little atmospheric, but it feels really flatly directed, and I don't really connect to the actress ends up in torture.
Gwyneth's ancestor, Gwyneth.
They do a lot to try to connect with her, and I think her and Rose have a really nice conversation. I don't really care enough about her, which is important because a lot of the emotional stakes hinge on you caring about the character. I think the Dickens cameo is really, really tacked on and doesn't do anything for the story. And maybe because I'm used to celebrity historicals actually involving the historical figure in a more kind of tangible way. In this one, you could have easily taken Dickens out of it. It's just because it's a ghost story and it's in the time period. Let's have Charles Dickens. The best scene in it is Eccleston fanboying over Dickens. And I think Eccleston's really good in that moment as well. I love him criticizing him as well and how he plays it off. It's really good acting and really well written. But beyond that,
we're like, no, I don't think the Doctor really, not until 10. We're like, no, I don't think the Doctor really, not until 10.
This falls really flat for me. I mean, maybe this is unfair because Stephen Moffat just had a way better idea for a horror episode. But one of the best episodes in terms of atmosphere and tension is coming a few times away. This one looks really weak in comparison.
It's another thing of like what we were just saying, where it's like, this is the 3rd episode of the show. This is the first one that has a historical figure in it. They're just sort of working out how they want to handle that. So like later on, we'll get like Agatha Christie and William Shakespeare and Vincent van Gogh, and like they will be the centerpiece of the episode. The episode will be like about them and their work. But here it's like
it's just a cameo. The Charles Dickens cameo.
I mean, the Charles Dickens stuff in this episode I thought was actually the strongest part of it, because I thought he had kind of an interesting character arc, going from like a point in his life where he was alone and he was doing the same act over and over. He wasn't seeing his family. He has sort of a crisis in the middle when he discovers that ghosts or what he thinks is ghosts are actually real. He thinks, have I got the world wrong? By the end, he sort of comes to rediscovered his passion for life, and he decided to go to see his family. I thought it was kind of a nice story arc. The rest of the episode didn't really interest me that much. I mean, it's a Mark Gatiss episode, and I feel like he always comes up with good ideas. Like, this is a good premise for an episode, and I'm like, with Mark Gatiss episodes, it's not that the writing is usually bad, it's just that it's very one-dimensional. You get one-dimensional characters, one-dimensional writing for the Doctor and companion, and just everything sort of moving in a linear line and nothing really exciting happening. And I feel this is kind of typical of most of his episodes. It's It's not bad, but it's like, I'm not going to rewatch it much.
And it's interesting because you bring up the scene in The End of the World where Rose is talking to the alien plumber lady, and you compare it to when she's talking to Gwyneth. The former doesn't really have a lot to do with the story, but it seems way more natural and it seems way more informing of the character, and you really get a sense of it. The other one seems purely for function. We need Rose to figure out she has that sensibility. They're setting up Bad Wolf and Rose's father and stuff like that. It feels way more like this is a exposition dialogue scene rather than this is two characters connecting and coming together, if that makes sense. I think it just kind of hit on Rob saying about the one-dimensional writing, in that I don't feel it's really informed by character. It's more informed by we need this to happen in the story for the story to continue, and it just feels really weak in comparison to that.
The way they depict Rose in both of these episodes, I can understand a little bit more in the future and stuff, but she literally is getting like offended by like them using like the dead bodies and stuff. I'm like, I feel like Rose is a very like traditionalist, doesn't think outside the box very much.
Well, she's a normal person.
And even later on, just the idea of Jack being pansexual, weird.
Well, that's a different episode.
I know, but it just seems like a consistent thing that anything outside of the traditional ideals, she's like, I can't comprehend.
I think that makes sense for her. She's like relatively young and has almost no actual life experience with people who are like in any way different from her, like outside of her neighborhood, outside of her country. Like she's very like steeped in her own personal bubble, and for her to venture outside of that is completely foreign and like really difficult for her to conceptualize, which is what makes her such an interesting companion. Like she's always out of her comfort zone until she like kind of, gets her footing and starts running around with the doctor, and he can leave her alone for like short bits of time. But even then she still like has trouble with some things.
Really like about Rose in this series compared to the next one is this series she feels like a real person. I realize a lot of people still dislike her in this series because she still has a lot of bad qualities, but I feel like that makes her a bit of a more well-rounded character, especially when she sort of does not know how to adapt to these situations. Especially at the time, actually, it was very unique for a companion to be like that.
When you're talking about the fact that she never ventured outside her whole thing, and I think you see that a lot in her relationship with Mickey, who just is some guy who was in her area that she kind of hooked up and had a relationship with, even though they don't really have a lot of romantic chemistry. And as much as I don't like how she treats Mickey and how the series treats Mickey, that does get better as it goes along. But she doesn't have that kind of life experience. She never really tries to venture outside of her comfort zone and to find something that works better for her and would fulfill her more into life, until she runs into this random person with an arm who takes her on this magical adventure. And I think that was definitely needed for this new series to go into a new direction of taking the companions and their backstories and their lives as seriously as the doctors.
The only problem I have with that, with Rose and the whole making thing, she does understand that I need something more than this guy, but this continues to keep him as like a pet, and it's super uncomfortable. Anyway, go ahead, Nick.
I was just going to say, like, speaking of that, I don't think conservative isn't the word I'd use, but also just thinking about it, as we talk about all this, I also completely buy that Jackie would raise her that way, knowing what we know about Jackie and who she is.
It's not so much of a negative thing I was just bringing up, but just more of I observed that, like, more this time around. Like, she's just very, like, doesn't broaden her ideas or mind very well. At least not yet.
They're all kind of expected to be these really great people, and like they're supposed to be able to adapt well and become resourceful and brave, and like he just literally picks people up off Earth and is like, hey, want to go on a trip? And sometimes it's a kid.
That's also, though, an interesting thing of like just the progression of time. A companion nowadays would never like bat an eye at something like that, but that's also just because we pulled Rose from 2005 and we're pulling companions from 2019 now.
Well, it was necessary to do a lot of that stuff because it was the first series and they needed to sort of have an anchor for the audience.
I like to see him bring a companion that's like from the Victorian era in today's like news.
Never get non-modern day companions anymore, and I'm so mad, man. That's the point. I want more Victorians. I was happy when we got Jack because he was from like the 51st century.
I'm totally agreeing with you here, yeah.
When Bill's like wardrobe came out, when we saw Bill and I saw those colors, I was like, oh, is she from the 80s? No. And then she wasn't, and I was mad.
It's him and Nyssa who are kind of the last ones, not from, and Adric as well. But the Fifth Doctor's companions. Maybe that's why they decided to just make them all modern day.
There's too many of them now. There's not a single one in the new series that's not from like the year the season came out.
I mean, if we count Jack and Nardole, then yes.
Nardole is technically main companion because he is in the cast.
Traveled with them for like a whole series. I think he definitely counts as a companion.
Yeah, I'd say so. Nardole was the last one. Like, I'm on board with that. Like I said, my favorite companion is Jamie, and he's from the Highlands, so I'm totally on board with that.
I think the second Doctor actually never had a companion that was from modern day Earth. As far as second Doctor exclusive companions, like Jamie was from the Highlands, Zoe was from the future.
Because I want to build off of what Rob was saying about Charles Dickens, because I do actually like his art, and like I wasn't sold on it as the episode was progressing, but I do think we gave him a little bit of like a nice progression of like he starts out thinking that he knows everything, and he has like this crisis of, like you said, oh God, if ghosts are real, does that mean I've just been a complete idiot who doesn't understand the world for like my entire life? And like, have I wasted my life thinking I know anything? No, like finding out new things doesn't mean that like you have to have like a crisis. It's just an opportunity to like realize that the universe is bigger than you thought it was. And it's like, that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. It just is sort of weird looking at this, having seen where the show goes from here, and like you would expect this to be the Charles Dickens episode, but it's just an episode with Charles Dickens in it.
If he was another kind of character, not just Charles Dickens, that was my issue. I think his arc is actually decent. He's way more interesting than the other characters they introduced for this episode. My bone of contention is more that you bring in this kind of big name, and his contribution to the story is next to negligible. I agree that his character arc is probably the most interesting thing about the episode. This is a controversial opinion. The Two Master story in series 10 finale, you could remove that from the episodes and not really lose anything in terms of the story, but it's also some of the best stuff in the episode.
The master flirting with themselves will always be entertaining.
I love the two interactions. Anyway, that's going off tangent. I will also say that him talking about reconciling with his family is really hilarious. If you know anything about how Charles Dickens treated his first wife, he wasn't very nice to his first wife. I'll just leave it at that.
Famous old writers are just like being terrible to their first wife. Like if they have another wife, that wife's fine.
I guess they needed a trial run.
And it was just English culture back then to treat the first wife terribly.
It could be a culture thing because as terrible as it was, there was this expectation that women wouldn't live as long, especially with how terrible childbirth can be, and they didn't have the same modern day advancements to keep them alive. So men tended to live longer and would remarry. So it might have been a cultural thing. They're not going to make excuses for the fact that Charles Dickens was a scumbag. Pretty sure his wife outlived him. So
we mentioned briefly just the fact that this was written by Mark Gatiss and how that's kind of unfortunately telegraphing how little there is to say about it. You mentioned that you don't find him to be a particularly bad writer. I'm looking through like his list of episodes for this show right now.
When I say that majority of episodes are average, the occasional one being bad, and I think a couple that I've liked. So he's not the best. As far as Doctor Who goes, at least, I've actually liked his stuff outside of Doctor Who.
I could talk for a while about his stuff on Sherlock, but like I feel like his two most recent Doctor Who episodes, which were The Empress of Mars and Sleep No More, those are some of the worst things that this show has ever done.
I think Empress of Mars is pretty fun, so we're going to disagree on that, but that's for like another review.
We'll get to that, so we will talk about that and how everyone hates it.
I've been meaning to watch League of Gentlemen. It's supposed to be a great show.
It makes me even more disappointed that Mark Gatiss' Doctor Who work is just a bit
It's weird because one of the best things to come out of the modern day era of the show for me is An Adventure in Space of Time, which he wrote. I
think he's a very good writer, but a bad science fiction writer. He's good at coming up with ideas, sci-fi ideas, but he doesn't know how to execute them properly.
Yeah, because League of Gentlemen is horror-based, isn't it? It's a horror comedy.
He's written like 7 for this show, and they're all sort of like what you're describing, which is pretty cool premises, but the characterization is kind of flat and boring. The structure is kind of flat and generic. There's not really any high highs or low lows.
There's also way too many callbacks in most of his episodes to like old episodes of the show. His episodes mostly just come across like him fanboying for the classic series instead of actually trying to write a good story for the modern series. Yeah, I think especially his Moffat era episodes as well. But I think that was a problem with the Moffat era generally. So with too many callbacks.
One of my favorite what the hell references to Classic Who. In one of Gatiss's episodes, Matt Smith references the story arc of the Fifth Doctor trying to get Tegan back home. This wasn't story arc in series 9.
The less references to Tegan, the better.
An entire series-long arc of the Fifth Doctor trying to get Tegan back to Australia. Entire series to get her back.
Remember the Empress of Mars when we end the entire conflict of the episode with a random out-of-nowhere cameo?
Oh, yeah.
Suddenly, Alpha Centauri shows up, a character/species that hasn't shown up in like 3 decades. They just showed up.
So there is a context to that because the story is The Curse of Peladon and the sequel to Monsters of Peladon. It was this weird riff on the EU, but the Ice Warriors were significant in both stories. They're basically depicted as not so much good guys, but they're neutral and they help the Doctor in that story in The Curse of Peladon. But it's such a random, obscure reference to throw into this episode. No modern day viewer would have any context for.
Notice how little we've talked about this episode. Hence why I say, for as much as I came out of the end of the world going like, it was a mistake to skip over these when we were doing our initial reviews. I would not recommend that anyone skip that episode if they were watching Series 1 for the first time. I say skip this one. If you're just like committed to watching all of them, then like there's nothing wrong with it. Just like give me the highlights. How can I get through this as fast as possible for like the best episodes? Ignore this one. There's really not much here.
I do actually think The Unquiet Dead has more of an attempt at a story than The End of the World does, because The End of the World is, when you break it down, the culprit who's actually behind everything is so obvious. As far as like story quality, I find The End of the World to be very weak. The Unquiet Dead, though, there's not too much in it either. I can't really say one of these episodes is significantly better than the other.
Just to go towards Nick's point about how there's nothing to talk about in The Unquiet Dead, because it was bothering me, the alien in the Empress of Mars is called Alpha Centauri. Things people bring up is the fact that it looks like a penis.
No, it doesn't. Hang on.
That's in the Wikipedia
just
page.
Google it.
In the Wikipedia page for The Curse of Peladon, that people pointed out that the Alpha Centauri looks phallic.
Kind of,
Yeah.
but
I will say it's not as bad as Terror the Vervoids. Sorry, guys.
yes. I just showed her a
What?
picture of the Vervoids.
Oh my God,
Also,
this review has
think-
literally just become trying to figure out what creatures look like a penis on Doctor Who.
So in the Tom Baker era, there's a story, I can't remember the name of it right now, but I have seen it, where there's a monster that literally just looks like a penis. It is actually a literal penis. Tom Baker at one point blows on it. The creature from the pit. That's it.
Oh.
That's even worse.
I think it's one of the most infamous moments in the show's history, and it was clearly Tom Baker just sort of going off script and just like,
Wait, I think I remember what you're talking
trying to
about.
see what he could get away with.
I'm looking it
What have
up.
Now hold on. Why did they do this? What did they
Did you
do?
just search up the creature from the pit monster?
Point that I'm gonna make, and it's specifically because we're talking about this right now, is the one thing I will say about Rose is that she is absolutely like man hungry. She's talking to Gwen and she's like, basically the culmination of the conversation is, did you ever look at a boy? And Gwen was like, I'm not sure I know what you mean. And I'm thinking of anyone else asking her this question, Donna, Martha, anybody, they'd immediately go, oh, okay, well, do you have any hobbies? What do you do for fun? Rose is just like, no, you must have looked at a boy. And it must be like, there's no way, you don't exist.
You must be as thirsty as I am. The thirst is real.
And like, I don't know if it was loud enough for anyone else to hear it, but she also brought up that this is where we introduced the Cardiff Rift, which the fact that hasn't come up yet just shows how unmemorable it is.
It's also where they set up Bad Wolf and they reference Rose's dad being dead.
We watched these last night and I didn't remember any of those things.
What is up with the resolution? Because Gwyneth blows herself up, sacrifices herself to save the planet and stuff.
Yeah.
And when they get outside, I don't understand what was going through Mark Gatiss' head when he wrote this. I think it was an attempt to be clever. But the Doctor says, actually, Rose, Gwyneth was already dead when she stepped into the portal. And she's like, wait, that doesn't make any sense.
The heroic sacrifice of the focal character in the episode for absolutely no reason.
Probably one of my favorite moments in the show's history, because they literally just bring it up. Wait, that doesn't make sense.
First of
I
all,
think what they're trying to apply there is that her body like stopped living, but her soul is still in there. Because she's still making the decisions, but she just like for some reason she's just dead now, making decisions.
I think we can all agree the point of the Unquiet Dead is that classic Who has a lot of monsters that look like genitals.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. That's the
It
only thing
reminds
to
me of
take away
Silence
from
in
this
the
episode.
Library. The suits would kind of talk for the people afterwards, except here we don't get any explanation.
Right,
It's just like,
yeah.
oh, her
Ice
body's a
cream.
meat puppet.
Like
They literally bring it up just to say, actually, we're not going to explain it.
I don't.
I'm telling you, it's the are ghosts real? Of course not. Or are they?
I don't-
That's it.
That makes
That's it.
What was the episode called with the Frankenstein last season? It's like you have an explanation. You need to try to make it. Ooh.
Oh, was that the thing with Graham, like, saying,
Yeah.
wait a minute, what about those ghosts that I saw back in there? And then they're like, oh,
I guess they're just ghosts.
just walk off.
What I'm getting from your explanation, Lucy, is that she walks under the arch and her body is dead, but her soul is alive, but her soul is still inside her body. So how is that different from just being alive?
You're a vampire. Your organs just stop working. You got no heartbeat. The doctor walks over and he's like, "Oh, she's dead."
What it reminds me of is the Doctor's daughter, when randomly at the end of the episode they just say, Jenny actually brought the TARDIS here in the first place. Why even? What? How?
Well, like you mentioned this, she lights a
Can't do
match,
this.
blows them up. Why? How does that work?
Where do they go? Like, are they going to kill them?
They're already made of gas. Did exploding them just eviscerate them completely?
That served no purpose because the rift subsists through time. Like, it never goes away. She just, like, there's not a concrete bridge anymore, which apparently makes no difference because it just keeps getting bigger anyway.
Is that what the implication is?
She was the bridge. She
No.
was the way they were able to come through.
Yeah, so is the explosion that means nothing? Is it just that they can't do anything because she's dead? We interpreted it in the moment as like she lights a match and it explodes all of them and they die in the explosion. Maybe that's not what's meant to have happened. Maybe it's they can only be around as long as she's alive to like conduit them to this world.
So I just want to go back on the whole thing with Jenny.
Out.
Apparently randomly bringing the TARDIS back in the Doctor's daughter. It reminds me of that joke from the Lord of the Flies episode of Simpsons. And everyone was saved by, let's just say Mo. And because when anyone was saying with ghosts are real, I was going to make a joke. It's like the whole thing where people say, is Santa Claus really real? Until I remembered this fucking show has done that too.
This is a mess. I've noticed that like our discussions are way messier, like independent of like Rob being slightly behind us by like 5 seconds because of lag or whatever, and that leading to each other. Our discussions will actually like just go like in complete nonsense if we don't have anything to say about the episode.
If the episodes are boring, we'll talk about the most random stuff.
I'm super tempted to, when we post this one, I'll put up DWD, The End of the World, and DWD, The Unquiet Dead, in parentheses, the one where we talk about genitals.
Yeah.
I have a question that's related to something from earlier, but if you had to choose a historical figure to put in an episode of Doctor Who and like center around them, who would it be? By the way, my pick is Charlie Chaplin.
My pick is Henry VIII because it seems very strange, actually, that Doctor Who has never done an episode involving him. In general, he's such a fascinating character. I think, it seems strange that he's never been in the show with all of the dozens of historical figures that have featured.
I was going to say Hitler, but we did that and completely squandered it.
He is still in that cupboard today.
Hitler, don't you mean Mo?
Oh no! Oh god, she's talking about. Okay, we have to end it here because this is ludicrous. She's talking about the video that Quentin Reviews did, talking about the History Channel and how they had like this whole.
Where Hitler
hunting Hitler. And so she's like, Hitler, don't you mean Mo?
No.
Because they saw an old picture of Mo Howard from the Three Stooges and were convinced that it was Hitler.
Because the build up to it is one of the funniest things I have ever watched in any YouTube video ever.
The History Channel is now just the Alien Channel.
Okay, actually, now that I've had a time to think about it, the historical figure I would pick is Amelia Earhart, because I think outside of like Rosa Parks, look at more female historical figures, and the mystery surrounding her disappearance would make a great Doctor Who story.
I would say
I was trying to be like, do I say Rasputin? But that hits about the Civil War, and that's kind of dodgy, and I don't know how you can make that a light, fun Doctor Who story. This show's been on the air for nearly 60 years now, And the
Yeah,
only
I'll
time they've
promote that.
ever been to Ireland is in a fantasy sequence in series 12. Well, whatever the hell that was.
This video is already we've gone too far. We've created a monster.
We need to let-
I like this dynamic that we've sort of inadvertently set for ourselves, which is that like every time we talk about a group of episodes, we have like one discussion that's relatively focused because it's about an episode that's actually interesting.
Yeah.
And like, we all have points.
It
And
wasn't
then there's another episode, complete nonsense, because we just don't have that much to say.
We'll get one day. We'll get to 2 back-to-back that are just good.
Once we get through these past episodes, we have the specials. And while The End of Time is so fascinating, you will definitely get a lot of focused material out of that. And The Waters of Mars is actually a really good episode. I do not know how we're going to get through Planet of the Dead without making it 3 hours of absolutely nothing. Or the next Doctor. The next Doctor is more boring.
We'll have Torchwood episodes to talk about too, though.
This will be interesting because like Planet of the Dead will be like the ultimate example of what I'm talking about, because we're going to be talking about the David Tennant specials in tandem with Children of Earth. So we're going to have like an episode of Children of Earth.
God.
And then we're going to transition in.
It'll look even worse.
This boring nothing of an episode in this desert. But for now, we have to like rein ourselves in. So this was a grand old time, but I'm gonna stop it there.
You're supposed to be in this video.
All knew you were going to be here.
I went into this thinking we would not get much time out of this. There's not a lot to talk about these episodes. It's nearly been an hour and a half.
Daniel, you fool. We've already established a precedent that if we think we're going to not have a lot to say, we're going to end up saying a lot about nothing.
Well, The Idiot's Lantern is coming up soon, so good luck with
It's another one that has all of the same things.
absolute classic episode. One of the best.
That's an episode with Series 2, Rose, so I'll get a lot of time talking about how much I dislike her, and also
boy.
David Tennant's stupid hair.
Okay, The Unquiet Dead. It's boring.